Nice to see you. Nice to see you. Nice to see you. People changing names. Goran Radman, who is the Minister for Foreign and European Affairs for Croatia. Katarina Bali, who's Vice President of the European Parliament, who is English and German. She can explain more. Peter Szijjarto from Hungary, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade. Nikos Dendias, welcome, who's the Foreign Minister for Greece. And from Bulgaria, Vesislava Petrova, who is the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. I have the rather unenviable job of trying to explain to those of you who just arrived where we are, where we've got to. For others of you, this is the next stage in a long continuum, discussing where European institutions are going. Now, I'm not going to give the same introduction as I gave about an hour and a half ago for the first session. But for those of you who've mysteriously arrived here late on, it's important for you to realize the number of ministers, the number of senior people who wanted to be at the Bled Strategic Forum, even if now it's a little emptier than it was earlier and people were standing in the aisles and standing round the back. But it shows that you want to be part of discussion about the challenges for Europe. Now, I'm not going to go through the challenges again because I'd like to come to each of them in a moment and ask them to see and to define what they see the challenges as. But certainly, all five of you, I made very clear that certainly based on the kind of things in the Bled Strategic Times and the kind of language we've seen, there is an expectation that some radical thinking needs to be done. There can't be complacency. So I'd like to shock you in that direction. To be thinking, we've talked about Ukraine and how the chaos, the weaponization of chaos from Putin has really created enormous ripples, enormous waves of uncertainty, and particularly the societal pressures that are now looming in the Northern Hemisphere and across Europe. Now, it's for you to define Europe. We're not talking about the European Union necessarily. It's about all institutions of Europe. We've talked as well about the Western Balkans and the real pressures and the expectations. And certainly the view from the Foreign Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister here in her remarks earlier on is that this is potentially existential. My word, not hers. But this is potentially existential, and she's a relatively new Foreign Minister, about the kind of challenges that each country faces, faced with populations who are going to be suffering extensively on food prices, food availability, gas, electricity, and all the things they take for granted, and how that's going to be handled. So, all right, let me go to a view from Hungary, to Peter Szijjarto. You've had an election this year. You're relatively secure in the sense that you know that for the next 3 or 4 years, there'll be no challenge to the government. Therefore, you're not facing an electoral cycle. And you have special relationships with Russia on gas. There was one signed almost a year ago. I say that because, in the end, do you think that somehow Hungary is going to escape the kind of privations that are certainly threatening in many of the European nations?
As far as I understand correctly, I'm representing the only neighboring country to Ukraine this time. And I have to tell you that we as a neighboring country are faced with the challenges of the impact of the war a little bit even more than those who are a little bit further away. We have received almost 1 million refugees so far from Ukraine. And that number is really telling about the tragedy which is going on in the neighboring country of ours. So therefore, our position in Hungary sounds to be very simple, but in order to reach that, there's a very complicated way to go forward, which is peace. So the only solution for all the challenges we could list here, when it comes to the economic impacts, when it comes to the energy-related impacts, when it comes to the individual tragedies of the families who have to leave their homes, the only solution for that is peace. So that's why we usually argue in the debates what kind of answer Europe or European Union should give to this conflict from this perspective. We always support those initiatives which seem to be able to bring peace, and we dislike those ones which rather lead to the escalation of the conflict. The other aspect, which I'd like to offer for you as a matter of consideration, is that we do think that we should make decisions and measures in Europe which are not more painful to ourselves than to those against whom we are addressing those measures. And this correlates pretty much to the second part of your question, which is regarding energy. Regarding energy, are we dependent on the Russian sources? We have to speak honestly. Yes, we are.
You have a special deal signed a year ago.
No, it's not. It's absolutely not special. Many other countries have long-term contracts with Russia. Some of us on the stage as well. So please do not try to circulate, let's say, fake kind of perceptions as if our agreement with Russia would be special. It's not. It's a 15-year-long contract. Similar to this contract, many other European countries have long-term contracts with the Russians. By the way, if we had not signed that deal, now we would be in a very, very deep problem, because our annual gas consumption is 10 billion cubic meters, out of which 8.5 billion cubic meters must be imported. Now, given the infrastructural determinations in the region, we are mostly dependent on the Russians. Does it make fun for us? No, it does not. Would we want to be more diversified? Yes, we would. But the problem is that the supply of energy is neither ideological nor political issue. That's a purely physical and mathematical issue. Physical in a way that you need to have a source which must be accessible through some infrastructure. On the other hand, it's mathematical because you need a volume which you have to buy. And you know what? If one of the biggest American and the biggest Austrian company in energy sector, which had the right to exploit one of the biggest new possible sources in Central Europe, namely in Romania in the Black Sea, had they decided to exploit that gas, the whole geography in Central Europe regarding energy supply would be totally different. But since the Americans and the Austrians decided to leave that project, there is no potential big new source in the region for us to be accessed. So why we buy gas from Russia? Because physically we can't buy it from anywhere else, regardless of the fact that we have built interconnectors with 6 of the 7 neighboring countries, regardless of the fact that we are the #1 customer of the Kirk LNG port, and regardless of the fact that we had a 3 billion cubic meter annual contract with the Americans and the Austrians, which they have walked away from just very recently. This is a clear situation. This is a physical issue. That's why we never supported the energy sanctions and will not support the energy sanctions. And when we do not support the energy sanctions, it doesn't have any kind of Russian aspect. It's a pure Hungarian aspect, because otherwise we would not be able to supply the country. Physically, it's impossible. This is the true situation.
Let's move into the broad. Peter Szijjarto, I mentioned the election, 4 months ago now. I mean, does that change? Does that give you a sense of stability about how to plan, even if you're having to confront the Danube being at very low levels and so many issues which you weren't thinking about back in April? But does it give you a sense of security?
Look, political stability definitely helps. We have won the 4th continuous election, all 4 of them with a 2/3 majority. It's a non-coalition government. Our party occupies more than 2/3 of the seats in the parliament. This is sometimes called as dictatorship in the European media. But since this is based on the will of the Hungarian people, this is an unfair judgment, let's put it this way. But that definitely helps. If you can make decisions quickly, then under the crisis circumstances, that can be very helpful. If I look back to the last 12 or 13 years, the time we have spent in office, we had to face many challenges, including the migration crisis, COVID, its economic impacts, and now the war. And if you look back to each crisis, I remember that we always thought that that is the worst thing that can happen to us regarding the past and the future. And then the next crisis has proved that no, that was a bad crisis, but there can be even worse. And when we just got over COVID and its tremendous economic impacts, then a very legitimate expectation of my generation became a naive illusion, namely that we have to experience war in our neighborhood. So that's why I would say that time is definitely not on our side. Time is working against us. That's why we have to find a solution very, very quickly, how to create peace in our neighborhood. Otherwise, Europe will lose a lot. Because I'd like to tell you about my experience, and I don't know whether the others agree or have the similar kind of experience. But whenever I'm in contact with non-European or non-North American partners and colleagues of ours, believe me, the European description of this situation, the European narrative, is failed. So we are beaten in the international political arena. In Europe or in North America, we might think that the scenario, the narrative we build about this whole very bad situation around us is valid. But outside of Europe and outside of North America, mostly, this is not the narrative what others believe. That's why I think that it is the real vital interest of Europe to make peace as soon as possible.
But you don't believe that's possible at the moment?
Sorry?
There are no signals, apart from what I was talking to the Turkish Foreign Minister about, with the grain, which is producing a degree of confidence.
Yeah, well, look, I think we all, sorry to say that, but we all have to be thankful to the Turkish. Because they are the only ones so far whose initiative was successful in order to make a communication bridge between the two parties and reach some agreement on some issue. All other initiatives of whoever failed. Only the Turkish were successful in this regard so far, for which we have to be thankful. And you have asked at the beginning what kind of Europe should be there or might be there in the upcoming 10 years. I think that the current situation must make one thing very clear to all of us in the European Union. We do have to enlarge this integration. Because the bigger we are, the stronger we are. And if we are not able to integrate some newcomers, especially in the Western Balkans, then we will lose even more. Because all the conflicts, all the crises in the region have shown that if we are bigger, then we are stronger. And I do believe that this current situation must show very, very clearly that if we are not able to integrate the Western Balkans, then we will have to suffer other strategic losses in the future.
But you'd accept at the moment the Visegrad process is under challenge, is rocky.
You mean the cooperation within the Visegrad group? The Visegrad cooperation is a strong cooperation with very strong foundations. And we have, maybe one of the secrets of that is that we have a common understanding, that we represent a common position on issues where we can, and we respect the differing position of each other where we can't make a common platform. This is very simple. We always had issues to which we have approached differently. Of course, during war, all kinds of issues like this are more visible or spectacular. Let's put it this way. We might have different approaches on different issues, but this remains a very, very strong integration. And the Polish-Hungarian brotherhood will remain very strong as well, although I understand that there are a lot of actors within Europe who would like to kill this relationship and the Visegrad cooperation as well.
Well, first of all, I think my neighbour would be disappointed if I didn't react to what he said, because I'm quite known as a critic of the Hungarian government, and I think to say 4 times 2/3 is only half of the truth, because if you have an electoral law that you can have 2/3 with not even 50% of the votes, which was one of the elections, and you change the electoral laws even further every time, then that is maybe also easier to achieve. But and the other point is that I believe one of the existential challenges that we will be facing in 10 years is exactly what is always our, of course, point of conflict, is that we have to find this glue that Tanja Fajon talked about this morning. And this glue is our democracy, our values, our understanding of rule of law, and a common understanding of the rule of law. And if we have one or two countries who decide to define the rule of law differently to all the others, then that will not last for another 10 years. That is the one thing that, of course, I have to say if I'm sitting next to my colleague, with all due respect.
Peter Szijjarto, can you clarify for the record, your Prime Minister was in Houston a couple of weeks ago with Donald Trump. Does that mean that your government is actually actively moving towards the rejection of Paris?
I was there with the Prime Minister to accompany him on his meeting in New Jersey with President Trump. But beforehand, I just want to say that I think that in international relations, what we miss the most currently, and it's really painful, is mutual respect. Because I would never be brave enough to criticize the electoral systems of other countries, because, for example, in the United States, you can become a president even if you lose the vote. There are countries in Europe where there's no exact number of MPs as an outcome of an election. There's another very strong and powerful European country where if you win the election only by 0.1%, you got additional seats to have half of the seats at least in the parliament. Or there's another country where you get 100 bonus seats if you win the election regardless of the margin. In our case, we got more than 54% of the votes recently. Show me one another party, show me one another political group in Europe who can make it. 54% of the votes on our own, regardless of the fact that the whole opposition, from the fascists to the communists, through the liberals, have united. So I think mutual respect is very important. I would be never brave enough to comment domestic issues of other countries. We have won elections in 2010, 14, 18, 22 under 3 different types of electoral systems. In all systems. So, but this is one. This is domestic issues.
I think we should record.
Okay. Regarding.
I think the OSCE calls the Hungarian elections free but not fair.
Yeah, but this is a fake. This is a political judgment. Liberal and socialist.
We're talking about green at the moment.
Sorry?
We're talking about green at the moment.
But how does the electoral system of Hungary come to the green issues? I don't understand. But okay, I come back. Okay, I come back to the green issue. So I think that making the energy system of Europe green is vital, as long as it is not an ideological or political issue, but a rational one. And here nuclear power comes into the question. Because we do believe that without nuclear, it will be impossible to reduce the emission in Europe, and in the meantime, to help economy grow.
Can I just be very specific about the question?
Please.
That image of your Prime Minister with Mr. Trump in the United States 2 weeks ago, at a time when he's pushing very hard on the reject Paris agreement.
No, it was not on the agenda. No.
Okay.
It was not on the agenda. We were the first ones in Europe, by the way. No, this is like fake news. But we were the first ones in Europe to ratify the Paris Agreement.
Okay, well, I just wanted
and we take it very we take it very seriously.
Right, well, I wanted to check that you're not.
No, of course. Okay. We take it very seriously, but we do believe that without nuclear, the Green Deal is impossible. So that's why we are now building a new nuclear power plant, which will double the nuclear capacity of the country, which will help us to continue to grow the economy, which will help us to keep the utility costs still under control, regardless of the global turbulences in this regard. So as long as it is not an ideological question, we are on board. and nuclear must be respected, because nuclear is a safe, cheap, and sustainable way of generating.
All right, we've got 5